This is the Mental Mettle Podcast, and I am your host, Coach Thomann. I'm a former athlete, teacher, coach, and athletic director that switched careers after surviving cancer and a stroke in the fall of 2020. And I'm also a dad of a son and a daughter that were successful high school athletes that went on to college. Now I use that experience along with my ICF coaching certification when helping teams, coaches, and athletes from all over the country. Each week, I will pose a specific question that will help coaches of all types better understand mental toughness. In the Mental Mettle Podcast, coaches will learn to help their athletes overcome adversity without being the adversity they need to overcome. Hello, and welcome to the Mental Mettle Podcast. I am your host, Toman, and I am excited to be here today, podcasting to you for the very first time. This is the very first episode of the Mental Mettle Podcast, and I'm just excited that you're here as well. It has been a goal of mine for quite some time to start this podcast, and it just feels really good to be here finally getting started. As I said, I am start to this new to this podcast and this whole idea, but I'm here because I wanted to share my story, share my experience, my knowledge, and quite frankly, my passion for helping young student athletes develop mental toughness and be the best version of themselves. I've known for quite some time that resiliency and confidence are just keys in athletics, but not just in athletics, in life as well. And that said, I wasn't really sure about making a podcast aimed for young student athletes or of any age, really. I know that some kids listen to podcasts, but I wasn't sure how well it would be received, how well I would come off on a podcast to kids like that. And I got thinking about the best way to do that, and I realized that possibly I could aim a high, one level higher and have this podcast geared for the coaches of those student athletes, and hopefully, they can by extension then share this message and the idea of developing mental toughness to their student athletes. And that's exactly what I'm doing here today. That's the audience. That's what I'm trying to do here today and for this podcast. So there are, if I would break down the goal of this podcast in two goals, really. The first one is that I want coaches to better understand what mental toughness is. I believe that mental toughness is one of those things that is easier to recognize than it is to define. I also think that some coaches are really good at, all coaches really are good at noticing a lack of mental toughness, but not really being able to understand it. And sometimes they miss mental toughness when it's right in front of them. So I do believe that sometimes, and one of the first goals of this podcast is to be able to actually even define it. So the second goal is that I want coaches to be able to not only identify it, but how to teach mental toughness to their athletes. I've yet to meet a coach that doesn't agree that they would love to have more mental toughness in their athletes, and many complain about it, but very few in their practice plans, in their discussions with their team, actually intentionally speak about it and intentionally drill mental toughness. It's not, from a mental standpoint, not just, they'll get it in the practice, right? So, and worse yet, I think that there are some coaches that are good at instilling mental toughness in their athletes, but they, if that's the main course, they're getting a side of resentment and downright hatred, in the process. If I were to put this, and I just think that doesn't lend itself to really advancing the profession of athletic coaching and working with kids. So if I were to put this podcast, the goal of this podcast into one statement, it would be this. And it would be that the purpose of the Mental Mettle Podcast is to help coaches learn how to develop their athletes and help them overcome adversity without being the adversity that they have to overcome. Right? Let that sink in a little bit and raise your hand if you've been guilty of this. Right? I know I have. It wasn't on purpose, but I know that I've had players that disliked me, possibly even hated my guts at times, or, have really, completely misunderstood my intentions. I always wanted what was best for my players, but I'm not sure how well I communicated that. How intentional was I about, explaining my purpose for various drills or activities? And I'm sure I left them confused and struggling at different times. And now, don't get me wrong. Don't take this the wrong way. I'm not here to help you design soft practices for post-pandemic athletes, right? That's not the goal. Nothing could be further from the truth. I believe that practices should be hard. I believe that athletics should be hard. I believe that, it's athletics should be adversity. It's difficult. There's winners and losers. But in the process, you also have to talk to them, your athletes. You have to love on them. You have to design intentional activities that will strengthen relationships and strengthen that mental toughness. You should share a game plan for games and practices with your athletes and, get their opinion and try to explain your methods. Don't make things a secret. Explain to them why you believe a specific drill is beneficial and just praise them, especially this is big, praise them for their effort, not just their success level. So that's the goal here. That's what I want. This is what I'm passionate about. And quite honestly, you should be too. You should be passionate about this. Coaching is not about winning and losing games. That's part of it, but it's not just that. And you probably know that, but it always kind of gets lost in the day-to-day. So that's the main goal of this. Coaches, empower your athletes to overcome adversity with the Mental Mettle Academy. Teach them to face and conquer hardship without adding extra pressure. Visit the link in the show notes and enter the code METTLE, that's METTLE, at checkout for a special listener discount. The Mental Mettle Podcast is brought to you by our friends at QuickCut. QuickCut is the new alternative to Huddle. It's no secret why QuickCut is the fastest growing platform in the country. Their video analysis platform has everything you need. Plus, you'll get triple the storage at about half the price. And now get even more when you use the promo code 50hours for 50 hours of free video storage. Make the switch. You'll be glad you did. Visit quickcut.com today. So now that I've explained, the goal of the podcast and why it's useful, and those are good things, and perhaps you agree, but you might also be saying, yeah, but why are you the guy to do it? Which is completely fair. Because this is the first episode, and you may not know me at all. I'm sure there's some people I know, thanks guys, that know me that are listening, but I'm sure there's people that don't know me at all. And I'm happy to tell you a little bit about myself to explain where I'm coming from and why I have this, why I consider myself a bit of the authority or part of an expert on this mental toughness stuff. And for starters, I'll start with the fact that I've played almost every role you can have in athletics. In high school, I was a standout baseball and basketball player that went on. I played a little bit of college basketball where I was not the standout player, but I loved every part of the game and the experience. I went on after college and taught high school science for years and was a basketball coach. I've coached junior high boys, high school girls, and high school boys. And my my coaching career was probably very similar to my athletic career, and that there were highlights and there were lowlights. But again, I loved that part, just every part of it, and what I represented to a school, to a community, to the players, to the parents. I really enjoyed all parts of that. And after coaching for years, I did become an athletic director, where I learned a completely different side of the game. It's certainly more than just scheduling and things like that. I spent my time mentoring all types of coaches while helping them, just be better coaches. It's very similar to what I intend to be doing on this podcast. But I also started to see things from other perspectives. I, had a lot of parent-coach, parent-player meetings, and you guys have probably been in some of those, and they can be very frustrating, but they're very eye-opening to see it from a different perspective as well. And speaking of athletic parents, I've experienced that as well. Both of my children were successful high school athletes, and I played the dad role for years. My daughter played on some highly successful volleyball teams, and she was also a really gritty defensive basketball player on a very successful team her senior year of high school, and she did move on to play at least 1 year of college basketball. And for 1 year in her high school career, I was actually, her coach. And that was a learning experience, to be sure, coaching your, 16, 17-year-old daughter. We both loved the game and we both loved each other, but it didn't always look that way. If you happen to be watching this podcast on YouTube, then you saw the opening intro, and you can see this shot of me screaming like a man possessed. And the worst part about that story, and the part that I'm not, what I'm, the most ashamed of, is the fact that was my daughter that I was yelling at. And like I said, I've learned a lot from my coaching days, and I've changed since then. And then I have a son as well. My son was a high school standout basketball player. And he goes on and he's gone on and he's playing Division II basketball now at a school, University of Illinois Springfield. And this kid has taught me a lot about mental toughness and patience. And honestly, I have every intention of bringing him on the podcast at some point. Without giving too much away, his high school campaign was cut short by a broken hand. And of course, that was after moving. He missed part of his career due to the COVID pandemic. And all that combined, he missed the 1,000-point milestone for his career by less than 20 points. And it really sucked at the time, but I believe it changed him for the better. And like I said, I'm going to let him tell that story soon enough. I think it's worth mentioning for coaches to hear and for others to hear. So as I mentioned, I've been the basketball player, I've been the coach, I've been the athletic director, I've been the dad, and all that's great for experience, but how does that qualify to me being a mental coach and any type of expert on mental toughness? And that's, a longer story for a longer time that we'll probably dive into in a different podcast. But as I mentioned in the intro, so just a few tidbits there, is that I am a cancer survivor, I am a stroke survivor, and they both happened in a 4-month span of the end of 2020. And that upheaval in my life changed me, as you would imagine, and it just about broke me mentally for a while. But luckily, through therapy and through coaching, I was able to reset and change the trajectory of my life for the better. And it was on this path that I decided to become a certified coach. And when I mean certified coach, my certification is through the ICF. And the ICF is the International Coaching Federation. And their goal, or the ICF, they're considered the leading organization for the profession of coaching. And they seek to advance the profession by setting high standards and getting people independent certification. So coming from the world of education, like I believe in proper training, proper certification. I think it's good to get that training. I think it helps you be better at whatever you want to be better at, but it also lends credibility. And that's when I decided to be a coach. I sought out this very specific and very intentional training. So now it's that educational experience, my life experience, and the training and certification that I have. I use that to run my business, Mental Mettle Coaching. And my primary client base is student athletes. I've worked sometimes with educators and do some speaking and things like that, but primarily I'm all about student athletes. And in my fairly short coaching career so far, I have already worked with kids from tiny little private middle schools all the way up to scholarship athletes in the Big Ten and the SEC. I've worked with boys and girls, men and women, and players of at least 13 sports so far. In these individual sessions with these athletes, I coach them to help them overcome the mental obstacles that stand in their way from becoming their best. And I gain information and experience from every athlete I talk to. So many of them have similar stories and similar struggles, but I learn so much from each of them. And I've also really started to understand this player-coach relationship better. Almost all of us that, coach a sport at some point played that sport at some time. And that experience is, you don't have to have it, but you really need some that experience. But I also believe there's a downside of that, in that it narrows our perspective. We coach the way we may have been coached, or perhaps we coach in the way that we thought we wanted coached. And each person can only go through their life one time, obviously. So you have the experience, you have your experience, but if you stay in that narrow window, you miss that, every kid goes through it a little bit different, from a little different perspective, a little different situation, and they have different coaches, different parents, and all that. And my eyes really have been opened on how each situation is different and how different the relationships can be. And it's this experience and information and this training that I just want to pass on in this podcast for the betterment of the student athletes, to gain that mental toughness for all. Coaches, you love to practice plays, drill defense, and develop physical skills. But what about mental toughness? Well, mental toughness can be drilled like any other skill. And at the Mental Mettle Academy, coaches can learn how. Learn and teach mental toughness with your activities and drills. Visit the link in the show notes and enter METTLE, that's METTLE, for a special listener discount. Luckily for you, it won't just be me on the podcast. I plan to have various guests come on and speak about all sorts of different aspects of mental toughness. I plan to bring on some coaches that I know, some that I haven't know yet, but I'm wanting to bring them on. I've got some athletes lined up. I've got some officials lined up. I'm going to even bring on some parents, guys, so just to get that different perspective. So if you would, please subscribe to this podcast, tell your coaching buddies around it or about it, and get them there. I want these conversations to be a discussion topic, a discussion point, a launching point for coaches of all types, just to change this conversation and advance that conversation about mental health in sports. And that's really what I'm here for. So once again, thanks for tuning in. I can't wait to have you listen next time. And until then, keep forging your metal. Thanks again for listening to the Mental Mettle Podcast, produced by Coraggio Media, sponsored by QuickCut, a video management platform for every level of play, and by Mental Mettle Coaching, helping athletes learn to face adversity in a spirited and resilient way. The Mental Mettle Podcast is created each week to help players develop more mental toughness, and that is something that will help all of us. So help me out and like and share the Mental Mettle Podcast with your friends. Until next time, keep forging your mettle.